Okay, it is 10:01, so why don't we go ahead and get started? I'm sure others will be joining us as the time progresses. My name is Tammy Holland. I work at the Institute for Excellence in Mental Health at UT Austin. Look, and I'm sporting my UT sweatshirt today because of the cooler weather, and I'm a happy girl right now. So thank you for joining in today. This is our quarterly statewide system of care training meeting. We've got a very good trainer and training topic today, so I'm excited that you've joined us. There's a couple of things that I want to remind everybody of before we get started. The first is in a few minutes, I'll be asking everybody to sign in using the link that I'm going to put in the chat box. So if you'll go to that link, sign in. Actually, I'm going to do that at the very end of the session. That way you'll be able to do the evaluation all at the same time on the same little survey. And then the other announcement that I want to make is that if you are not part of the official system of care community and you've not already signed up for the contact list, the distribution list, then you will have the opportunity to sign up today. In the chat box, I'll have a link to the system of care community roster. We're wanting to get as many professionals on our roster as we can, and that will put you on the distribution list for future meetings and training opportunities and other things like that. So thank you again for joining in this morning's quarterly meeting. Well, I hope you have your coffee near you. We're going to get started now. So I'm going to ask Nydia Heston if she will introduce our speaker. Nydia is our certified family partner who works at the state level system of care. She's at HHSC, and she's part of our system of care team. Nydia, would you tell us who our speaker is today, please?
Hi, good morning, everyone. So this morning we have Amy Pierce. She'll be our speaker. Amy is an MHPS peer support supervisor. And I'm sorry, Amy, I'm not sure what ALF is.
Advanced level RAP facilitator.
I'm sorry?
Advanced level RAP facilitator.
Thank you. And Via Hope's Recovery Institute deputy director. She has been working in the peer movement in the state of Texas for almost 2 decades. She most recently was a CEO of Resiliency Unleashed, which is an international training and consulting company focusing on the development and implementation of peer services. She has extensive experience. I think there should be another word in there to say how much experience she has in the peer support sector. She previously started the first peer support program in the state hospitals in Texas, was a peer support worker in a community mental health agency, and was also the program coordinator for a transitional peer residential housing project funded through the 1115 waiver program. See, extensive. Amy is a peer. She's a family member with both mental health and addictions experience. She's a certified peer specialist facilitator. There is advanced level RAP facilitator, assist trainer, and WAM facilitator. That sounds awesome. Amy was previously chair of the PAIMI Council in Texas and on the U.S. National Disability Rights Board. Amy is a lover of life and all that is possible for human beings. Amy doesn't know this, but I think I first heard her story on a podcast on a radio station. I think it was back in 2016, if that's possible.
It could be.
I met her finally in person in real life in 2018 and had the pleasure of working for her with her for a couple of years. And if anything, that last line is her. Amy is a lover of life and all that is possible for human beings. So thank you, Amy, for being here. I'll also just mention Alejandra Adan, although she asked me not to. She is, I believe, the manager for Recovery. You'll have to tell me the name.
Recovery Institute.
For the Recovery Institute at Via Hope. So thank you both for being here. We have someone monitoring the chat. And then Amy will just let us know how to proceed. Thank you, Amy.
Thanks, Nydia. And I just really appreciate the opportunity to be here with you all today. And it's good to see some familiar faces on here already. And I'm really looking forward to the conversations that we're going to have today. I do want to note it's a very short time to cover a whole bunch of material. So you're going to notice in the slides that I have, there's a lot of language on it. There's also a number of slides that I may skip through. Primarily, I did that just so you would have it to be able to take with you, have it as a resource should you choose. All right. So if I skip something, I promise you it's okay. How I kind of want to start is, let me get this screen up. And please, if there is one video that I'm going to play, and if when it starts playing, you don't see it or something, someone just talk out loud and say, hey, Amy, we don't see it or we don't hear it. Because that always tends to happen, unfortunately. So I'm just being prepared. All right. Okay. So I just want to kind of say and let y'all know what kind of the agenda that we have today for the next little bit. We're really going to be looking at what at the Recovery Institute we consider the 5 pillars of PSI or peer support implementation, really specifically looking at the importance of organizational culture, like the funding of those positions, right? We've got to have the money some way, somehow. Recruitment and hiring of peer specialists, peer support staff, role and clarity, and supervision and career advancement. And once again, there's a lot of material, but I just want to highlight a lot of these areas. And hopefully at the end, you might have some questions that I can answer or some follow-up things that we can provide information to you as well. So just for my own sake, do you mind just kind of putting in the chat who you are, the role you have at that organization, and like, what's one thing you hope to gain from our time together? I always like to hear from each of you before I step into facilitate is like, what do you hope to gain? Hopefully I'll be able to touch on some of the things that you have there.
I'll go ahead and start.
Thanks. And you can also put it in chat as well. So feel free to just put it in chat or just say it out loud. Thanks,
Oh,
Doris.
okay.
No, you're good.
Well, my name is Doris. And yes, I work with Emergence Health Network, and I'm relatively new to the SOC program, with the changes of leadership that have been happening, but I oversee our school-based program for 3 of our school districts. So I hope to gain a little bit more information about the system of care in general, and more about like everyone involved, and just to learn more from these individual trainings, I think is great.
Perfect. Thank you. And I do want to say, I love the work that y'all are doing. I love the projects y'all are working on. As a person with my own lived experience who had my first hospitalization when I was in high school, hearing and seeing the differences that y'all are making within the school system mean a lot to me personally. So I do want to just say that out there. And I think we'll be able to touch on a lot of what y'all are putting in there. And once again, at the end in the question and answers, if there's something that I didn't cover, something you'd like to know, please feel free to ask those questions then. And if I don't have the answer, we'll find that answer, okay? So I'm going to go ahead and move forward on this. I just want to kind of start off when we think about peer support and we think about this work and the culture of peer support, it's really important that we know where this comes from. And there's a lot of spaces and places. And one of the things that we talk about in the peer support world is the CSX movement. And the CSX movement is the Consumer Survivor X Mental Patient. And this is where the work comes from, really, that civil rights movement, people staying and like wanting their voice to be heard, hearing things such as nothing about us without us. A lot of the CSX movement really started in a broad way alongside of a lot of the other civil rights movements in the 70s. It's the place where a person's really started advocating for what was right, for rights. And it's that place where the beauty of the value of lived experience really started shining. And you can see how it kind of goes from there. And so there's like these two different ways that the movement offshoots, right? So on the top, we start talking about recovery values. So from the movement and from what people are sharing and saying, it's like there's this importance of these recovery values, this place of shared understanding and shared way of honoring people in their journey. And from that, we have up here where we start thinking about the more formalized system is we have what's called the recovery movement. Many of y'all have heard about it, recovery-oriented services. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about these, so I just want to highlight there. But at the bottom part, you start seeing the value of lived experience, and that's where our peer roles really came in, right? Where this place where we started having the professionalization of persons with lived experience and the creation of those peer specialist roles. And so I love this quote, and I probably have never done a training or anything just around peer support without it. And Sherry Mead is a force to be reckoned with in the mental health peer support world. And what she says is that peer support is a system of giving and receiving help founded on key principles of respect, shared responsibility, and mutual agreement on what is helpful. Peer support's not based on psychiatric models and diagnostic criteria. It is about understanding another's situation empathically through the shared experience of emotional and psychological pain, right? It's that place that comes from the heart, that connection from the heart and from a shared journey. Not the same, but shared understanding. And once again, if you just will put in the chat, I just want to kind of see and have us starting to think and thinking about your organization, the culture at your organization specifically. And it may be that you're seeing that peer specialists are currently doing this, or that these are things that you see that a peer specialist might bring to the organization. So just throw some things in the chat, and just so we can kind of like learn from each other, kind of what are some of the things that you're thinking about? And my hope is that when we complete today, in our short period of time of kind of highlighting that peer specialist role, that you may even see some other roles or other contributions that peer specialists can bring to your organization. And just so you know, I have about 3 little puppy dogs here in this house, and one keeps trying to get in my lap. So when I'm going down there, there's no puppy dog. I just want to let you know that. So anytime when we're talking about peer support and we're talking about this work, I just want to highlight what we're actually talking about. Peer support is this space in the continuum. When we think about continuum of helping relationships, we start thinking about more clinical services like psychiatrists, psychotherapy, case management. It's more one directional, right? So it's more of a person with expertise stepping in or working along with a person and stating what it is they believe that a person needs to do, right? On the other end, when we think about friendship, there's that pure mutuality, right? I can call my friend up at midnight and just say what I need to say, and I know they're going to be there. There's nothing in the way of that place of mutuality, and they can call me up at midnight. But it's just friendship. When we start looking at peer support, there is this line, and I like to show that there's many different ways in which peer support can be implemented in different places on this continuum that it can show up, right? When we talk about peer-run organization, it's more towards the mutual center set side. When we talk about sometimes when peer support is in more clinical settings or in roles that may have more case management like work, it's going to be more towards the run directional. Just something to kind of think in the back of your head as we go forward. And so when we think about culture, right? Because culture is part of that continuum, right? Those who go in college, those who get degrees as a psychiatrist, as a social worker, as all of this, there's a culture that they come from. There's a culture in which peer specialists also come from. And so it's important that we start thinking of, like, where does this culture overlap? And how do we have these two cultures work side by side? Whether it's in the school system, whether it's in a traditional system of care, how do we find that beautiful space where cultures can really work side by side and each culture can be honored? And when I say about culture, I kind of like this next little thing. I was playing a little bit too much with these things. You hear a lot about the medical model or traditional model and the recovery model. So I just wanted to put here for a second. And you can start seeing some of the distinctions in that viewpoint, right? Typically a more traditional model or traditional way of thinking about supporting someone who has a mental health challenge is around making sure they're stable, right? Sometimes the focus can be on those deficits or the things they may never do. Whereas in a recovery model or a recovery culture, we always come from that place that anyone and everyone can get well, right? There's always that place of hope for a future. It's about the partnership and about focusing on strengths and having high expectations for the individual. And this is the space that a peer specialist must always stay within. And it's actually within our code of ethics, which we'll put a link to the code of ethics here in a little bit if you've not had a chance to look at those later. I love this because when I think about my own life and my own journey as a young person, all the things I was told I would never do, and it came from a place of knowledge from the professional and their experiences with the diagnoses I had and their experiences of someone who had some of the difficult challenges that I had. But what it did was it really put me into a space for myself where I became a really good mental patient. I really gave up. And so when we think about cultures, like what type of culture are we creating for persons? And in the sense of a culture, there's many ways that culture shows up, right? It may be in language. Typically in a more clinical setting or a more medical model setting or formalized setting, you may use person first language, which would be like Amy. Amy is a person who has a diagnosis with schizophrenia. But from a peer specialist standpoint, how I speak about myself is that, my name's Amy and I'm a person who hears and sees things that others don't. Kind of see the difference? That decision-making place comes from a place of expertise versus a place of supporting that self-determination in all cases, in all places. And it's actually the first of the Code of Ethics in a Peer Specialist Code is about supporting that self-determination. Education looks different for peer specialists, which is part of culture. Whereas for many persons coming in and providing professionalized services, you get that education from books in a classroom. And for me, or for many of us who are peer specialists or who have navigated systems, a lot of the education comes from quiet rooms and locked doors. From that experience of experiencing the system, from that experience of thriving despite odds, of that experience of resiliency. It's not something that is taught. It's something that is experienced and learned. And there are things that a peer specialist uses and utilizes in their role. So just some things to think about when we think about culture, those distinctions, and think about, is there overlap? Might there be places of conflict? And how do we really highlight that culture of recovery? And I just love this kind of quote. And this is some work that I did over in Australia. And we were really working on some of the places around recovery and wellness, that culture, and looking at terminology and thinking about recovery-oriented approach. And the bottom line on a recovery-oriented approach is that each person is an expert on their own life, and support should assist them to achieve their hopes, goals, and aspirations. And often we think because a person's navigating some of these difficult challenges in their life that they can't make those decisions or they don't know what those are. That's where peer specialists really can come in and be in a space of listening, holding that space with the person. I like to call like exploration facilitator, right? With no judgment, nothing else except for looking and seeing like, how does that person get there? And there may be things in the way, and that's where there's like collaboration with everyone, right? And so this is just, once again, these are some slides I put in there just for you to kind of have afterwards, but this is another way of looking at that more integrated model of recovery and how the different spaces being trauma-informed, self-driven, equity-centered, and strengths-based really can come into play, and the beauty that it brings for individuals in their well-being. I'm going to go past this. Once again, this is just some additional information for you to have. And we're going to send out a resource at the end with the PowerPoints. And one of those resources comes from Canada. And it really is a way of like looking at your organization, doing kind of an organizational assessment on creating a culture of recovery and looking at some very specific ways to do that. And actually, Alejandra, do you want to just go ahead and put that document in the chat? That would be great.
Sure. Is it the checklist or the?
No, it's the recovery one from Canada.
Got
the
it.
one I said last time. Perfect. Thank you. Once again, just for your resource, but I find that it's a really helpful thing when I go and work with organizations around crafting and creating that culture of recovery, because it's a very step-by-step way to look at things. And when I think about a culture of healing, I think about a culture of wellness, think about a culture where all voices are heard. This picture comes to mind. And this picture is something that someone drew when I was overseas somewhere doing some work. And, you look at the roots, what it's rooted in. What it's all about is about life, about possibility, is about the place of persons who are navigating difficult situations in their life, being in a place of discovery, being inspired, having wellness, whatever that looks like, place of possibilities. And I just encourage you to think about in your own self, in your own life, like, isn't this place up at the top and aren't those roots what you would hope for in a place in which you're getting support? Just something to think about. And so I'm going to finish kind of this conversation on culture, and I can't do it without playing this video because it's my favorite. And you may have seen it before, you may not have, but I want you to look at it, and I want you to watch it through the lens of Harry the Peacock is that peer specialist. Okay. Harry the Peacock is that person coming in to do something new. Once again, let me know if you can't hear it or see it.
Many organizations hire people for their unique talents. Yet once employees join the ranks, they're expected to blend in. Harry the Peacock found himself in this predicament when he was hired by Penguins Incorporated.
The Penguins were confident in their penguin ways. Their world was orderly, predictable, and safe.
But there came a time when things began to change in the land of penguins as new birds began to join their ranks.
Among the arrivals was Perry the Peacock.
Hi, everybody, how'd you do?
He was creative and imaginative, and at the same time, practical and sensible. The penguins were fascinated with the possibilities that he represented. They thought he had real penguin potential. Perry, in turn, looked forward to the promise of status, wealth, and a sense of belonging to a great and powerful enterprise. He felt certain that his future would be bright in this new land.
But as time went on, a couple of the penguins took Perry aside.
Look, Perry, we like your work, but some of the penguins are uncomfortable with you. Why don't you put on a penguin suit so you look more like us?
What's wrong with the way I am? Aren't my accomplishments more important than my feathers and my voice? Why do I have to change? The penguins had a dilemma. How much diversity could they tolerate in their land without destroying their proud culture? Why change the style that had made them great?
Perry and his friends had a dilemma too. How much should they try to change to fit in? What price were they willing to pay for success?
But sometimes our differences allow us to contribute what others can't.
Wolves!
Those penguins will be such an easy takeover.
Yeah, they're slow and bureaucratic, set in their ways.
Perry rushed to alert the penguins.
Hey everybody, the land of penguins is in danger. I saw wolves in the distance and they're headed our way.
Oh, really? You must be mistaken. There have never been wolves in our territory before.
Here, see for yourself.
He's right, and they are awfully close.
We've got to figure something out.
The birds put their heads together, came up with a plan to trap the wolves, and sprang into action.
With this best-selling video, viewers will see the advantages of diversity.
Okay, best-selling video. I love this. And one of the reasons is, and I hope you were able to see something for yourself. So often when we bring a new role into a system or bring a new idea into a system of care, there's a lot of pushback. There's a lot of lack of understanding. And it's really easy to do the same old with a new title, right? Because we do what we know and we use language that we know, and change can bring a lot of fear. And my hope is that as you continue to create these new cultures and the work that you're doing and, implement and integrate peer specialists into that role, is that you really see the beauty that they can bring. But the only way they can really fully bring that beauty is if they're allowed to fully be in the role that they're there to be. Does that make sense? In the sense of honoring their values, honoring their ethics, honoring the individual's self-determination as they walk alongside them. And that can be challenging, especially when you're looking at young people. There's a lot of fear that gets in the place, right? Fear of what's this person going to tell this person, what might happen. And when we really allow the peer specialist to flourish, magic happens and people's lives get changed. And it's not just the persons who are in service. It's also the persons who work alongside peer specialists. I've seen that happen over and over as well. So I know some of you have already implemented peer services. You've got some money, but we're going to talk about one of the other pillars that we have next really quickly, and that's funding. Because it's great to have a culture. If you can't support the peer specialist role or some of those new roles, it doesn't really matter, right? Because unfortunately, because of how the world is and sustainability of these roles, we have to figure out ways to do that. When we think about funding and sustainability of roles, there's a number of different ways that you can look at it. And this could be a whole take in itself, right? And there's a couple of points I really want to make in relationship to the funding and sustainability. And one of those first being, one of the big changes we had here in the state of Texas, for many of you may have heard about House Bill 1486. And this is the Medicaid reimbursement piece related to peer specialist billable code. Those of you who are family partners, those of you who are working with persons under the age of 21, it's not a billable service through Medicaid anyway, at this point in time. Hopefully all of that will change as far as for peer specialists. And I just wanted to let you know that's there. And it's where a lot of the certification pieces come from. It's where a lot of the requirements for supervision for peer specialists, it comes from this House Bill 1486 and the peer specialist billable code in the TAC. All right. So not to be remiss, but don't fear. Okay. Because you know what? We know that peer specialist and peer support brings increased sense of control and ability to bring about changes for persons they work alongside. We know that peer support does all of these things here because there's data, right? There's research done on the efficacy of the peer support roles. I say that in relationship to data because for a lot of grants and a lot of funders, having that data is so important to show why you want to take on this role, why you want to fund this role. And for many of you, you already have some type of funding going on in implementing these peer roles and family partner roles currently. But I do want to say and do want to encourage you as you're doing this, finding ways to make sure that you can track the work that peer specialists are doing, find ways that you can actually show the difference they make. It's not always easy to do because of language. It's not always easy to do because, like, how can you pull out like that peer specific role, right? Versus that's attached to all these other roles. But data is one of the things that is so important when we think about funding and funders and grants, right? And there is a lot of research out and about in the world from many different entities, whether it's SAMHSA, whether it's private organizations who have done their own research base that you can pull from that information as you're looking at writing those grants, as you're looking at including that in funding. And if you do need any help with that or have some questions, I can help you and point you to some places. But once again, depending upon what you may be looking out further, something to think about, right? The other part when we think about funding and sustainability is making sure that we know what the funders are requiring, right? So what are the requirements of this grant or the funding source for that peer specialist role? Are we meeting those requirements? And then the other thing is, I really encourage you to look, because a lot of times grants get written and what's in the grant actually does not mesh with that peer specialist role. And so being able to identify that, look at different ways in which, if a peer specialist or a family partner is being asked to do something that's outside their role, how can you look at that and actually make it as peer centric, so to speak, as you can and still meet those funding requirements? I see this happen over and over because people have, a lot of times persons who are writing the grants don't always have the knowledge of what the peer roles are or the family partner roles are. And they just know that there's money and that this works. And so they match it on to other traditional services as far as like outcomes. So that's something to kind of think about and look at. The other piece here is when you're looking at documentation, if you're looking at specifically honoring that peer role, is what's required by the funder. And if you're not billing Medicaid or you're not billing a fee for service, documentation can be very, very simple. And in doing it simple, it honors that peer relationship. It honors that place of what we call the place of confidentiality. Most of documentation is in relationship to a funder source. And still with that, there are so many different ways in which you can do documentation and support the peer specialist to do documentation that make sure that that person's voice, the person who they're working with, voice is heard and utilized. And that the language within that documentation is all human experience language. And once again, I do a different training on just specific peer-centered documentation because there's a lot of questions around that, right? And this last thing I always like to think about when we're looking at sustainability, like is the funding stream I'm using currently, is it very limited? Is it going to go away? Right? And how do I broaden that funding stream so that we can sustain this program should this grant end or something else happen. So always looking at different partnerships, different ways in which you can bring in funding for these beautiful roles that are there. There's also a lot, and y'all probably probably know way more than me at this point in time, because I've not done a lot of research lately, except for some conversations I've been having. But there's a lot of funding through education, through the Department of Education, really starting to look at some of these peer roles, starting to specifically look because of a lot of the opioid crisis, but also around the crisis around persons completing suicide. And I know that here in Texas, in many areas that we've working, that young people completing suicide is the rate is it's just disturbing. It always has been disturbing to me, but there's starting to be some different funding sources coming through that, and peer specialists are being seen as a way to support individuals within the school system of care, or young people with that as well.
Amy, I just wanted to add right quick. I believe we confirmed with Felicia Mason Edwards for our December office hours, and we're going to talk a little bit more about billing for, I think specifically maybe for family partners, like where those little bits might be, and other additional funding.
Awesome.
So for next office hours, we'll dive into that a little bit more.
I encourage you to take advantage of that, because you really do have to find ways to be creative, and also make sure, one of the things as a supervisor of mental health peer specialist, typically looking at from the adult system of care, is looking at utilizing the best funding source or funding stream. Because there's different sources that bill at different rates. And how do you make the most out of bringing those funds in and still honor the integrity of the role, right? It can be done, I promise you. It can be done. So let's think about it. So if we think about like just the value, right? And like, what are they going to bring to our organization? Which kind of goes into, we've got to understand this as we move forward in like our third pillar, which is around that recruiting and hiring piece. We need to have an innate understanding of like, what value do they bring to our organization? Like, how do I pitch this to somebody? How do I like have someone get, we need to invest in these roles? And so I have a thing that in another training I do, we get to play games, and, you know, I'm all about competition, but with this, we're not in a competition. But thinking about what value does peer workers bring? Do y'all think that peer workers can extend an organization's mission of supporting recovery by offering recovery through work to our consumers? Do you think that they can help current staff know what service users are dealing with, because they'll open up more to peer workers who will let the staff know what the issues are? Do you think peer workers will show service users that recovery is real and share other real life examples that inspire hope? Or do you think that the best answer is D, that peer workers will be able to share their own lived experience of why engaging in treatment and taking their medications enhance recovery? Which one of those do you think is the best answer? And just put it in, go ahead and put it in chat, and then I'll give you a couple of seconds, and then I'll have y'all hit enter. Everybody got something? All right, hit enter. What letter? A, B, C, or D? And Alejandra, will you share which one's winning when we get finished, everybody popping it in?
Okay.
Where are we at, Alejandra?
We're at C, and one depends on the context.
Oh, y'all are right. Look at y'all. Y'all are so good. But yeah, like it is C. Peer workers will show service users or persons who they're working alongside that recovery is real and share other real life examples that can inspire hope. That really is at the heart of this work. And does whoever put about the context, does anyone want to share what they were thinking about in relationship to that?
Yeah, hi, that was me. Hey, everyone. I think that sometimes there's so many people who just do not, they don't know what the peer role is and they don't get it. And so sometimes you have to start kind of where they're at, which clearly is not C. Sometimes it might be having a conversation about A first to get to C. That was kind of what I was thinking.
Okay, yeah, it's part of that preparation work that you do to educate persons at your organization prior to bringing in peer workers, right? And I think the A, what it was actually getting to and what my intention was, is a lot of times organizations think or thought and still think sometimes that the peer support role is kind of like a return to work program for persons that are in their services versus that actual professionalization of the role. So it's I like to make things a little bit hazy and fuzzy just for the reasons. But you're right, though. You've got to start where people are at and you meet people where they're at and you continue to do that education. But C right here is the bottom line of the beautiful value that peer workers do bring. And they bring so much more. And it's not just service users or persons and services that they embody and show that recovery is real. It's also everyone at that organization. Through their openness, vulnerability, and willingness to share, it can change others' views of what a person who may be experiencing challenges, what is possible for them. And so I always like to look at all the different sides that shows up. And so when we start thinking about bringing peer workers in and this third pillar of recruitment, hiring a peer specialist, it's important that those of you who are in that hiring role or that supervisory role or that educator role at your organization, that you have a really innate knowledge of what peer specialists are and what family partners are and the why, right? Because people are going to turn to you. People are going to turn to you initially for that education. And hopefully then as you hire peer specialists and family partners on board, they're going to also turn to them about like what their role is, because they really are the expert on that role. But, you know, these are some of the unique qualities that peer specialists and family partners really can bring into an organization. It's about sharing those recovery tools and strategies, kind of being in that exploration around those from that first person standpoint. It's about modeling reframing of a person's past into a place where they may have experienced some pretty difficult things, that they're able to then see what they gain from that and share that with others. It's about that place about moving beyond the comfort zone for both organizations and the persons that they're working alongside. Different strategies around utilizing self-help, being really strengths-based, supporting that place of overcoming fear, and overcoming fear not just for the person they may be walking alongside, but for the organization itself. There's that whole conversation around risk. We are very risk averse as organizations, right? But I do know that there were times when I made some choices that others thought were a big risk, and they changed my life, right? And when I'm talking risk, I'm not talking something that puts that person in imminent danger or harm to self or others. I'm talking about things where a person may want to or see what might be possible is they want to go to college when everybody said that that's not something that they can do because of the challenges they're experiencing, or finding a path to that. Or for me, it was I wanted to get off disability and I wanted to work part-time at the state hospital I've been hospitalized at. And the team basically wanted me to up my medications because they thought I was experiencing symptoms. because they were afraid, because I had been doing so well at this point in this like cocoon-like structure, they were afraid for me to take those steps. But as peer specialists, like we hold that space for persons, we talk about it and support persons' decision making, but also hear the place of fear from within. Because I was afraid for a long time to trust myself. I didn't trust myself. And a lot of times persons as well don't trust themselves. And so they're afraid of taking those actions or steps. A lot of talk about combating negative self-talk. We talk about it like catch it, check it, change it, defying the messages. And, you know, there's this beauty of defying the messages. And I was up in, heck, where was I at last week? Alejandra, I'm looking at you and I know where I was at, but the word just totally went away.
Borger.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Oh my gosh. I spent a number of days up in Borger, Texas, doing some training as well as some technical assistance and really being in the middle of the community. And they're a community who really is focused on the well-being of their young people. And they've had a lot of challenges with young people completing suicide and other things. And so I spent some time just talking with some educators for a little bit after a talk I did on Saturday night. And then the next week, I talked to some young people as well, in the sense of like sharing my story and telling about all the things that people said I wouldn't do, but like here I am. And this is one of the places where we talk about peer specialists, defy that message, because we are the evidence, right? Like my journey, my story is the evidence that people can and do better, that people can navigate hearing and seeing things that others don't. And still, you know, I own my own home. I've worked off a disability for I don't even know how long now. I'm getting old, but all the things people said I couldn't or wouldn't, I am. And you can't bump back at that. But understanding these things as a supervisor or a champion in bringing peer workers in is integral. And, you know, this is just basics about like at its basic, at its core, and this is more for peer specialists. Language is a little bit different for family partner. And I think I forgot to put that slide in, so I do apologize. So I just want to acknowledge that. I just can see it on my screen in a different place where I was creating it. But it's really a person with similar life experiences. It's someone who can communicate that experience to support others, whether it's through individual connections, supporting a group, leading a group, rap, etc. And when we start thinking of peer supporters or peer specialists or family partners as workers, we have to also remember they have to be able to meet the generalized work requirements of the organization. That's a big piece of this as well, right? You have to be able to meet those work requirements. And so as you think about setting up and thinking about like programs or even expanding your program or like reflecting back on, first we've got to learn the role, right? We've got to learn what these roles are and start thinking about how it might fit in our agency. And that may be reaching out to others. It may be doing a lot of research online, connecting with your state partners who have been doing this work for forever, but really starting to think about like, what can it look like? What does it look like? And also like, how can I be creative at our organization? Because each organization has a specific culture as well, right? It's important. You've got to have job descriptions. You've got to have clear job descriptions that have specific tasks that role is going to do. I lost the word, but that's okay. Job descriptions are your best friend. And I'll tell you 2 reasons why. One, as a supervisor, if you don't have a good job description for someone you're supervising, it's hard to supervise. As an employee, I guess I'm going to tell you 3 things. How about that? There's 3. As an employee, I, as an employee, need to know like what's the expectations, right? What if I'm even interviewing, like, what are these things? What are the things they're going to want me to do? Can I do that, or do I want to do that? But the other thing that your job description does, it is one of your best tools to use against or use as educational tool for those who say that the peer worker or the peer specialist or family partner is outside of their line or outside of their role when they actually are in their role. A lot of times there's a misunderstanding about what the role is, and having a clear job description can be a great educational tool and something that you can really back up with and support that peer worker and family partner in being in that role, should others have a different belief. Job descriptions and peer specialist code of ethics, best tools for those things. The other thing is you've got to think about supervision, right? So we start thinking about supervision, and I've got just a little bit at the very end because that is a big pillar, but like, what does supervision look like? Right? For those of you who are supervising or providing supervision to peer specialists, and they're coming in newly and getting certified, or just in general, you've got to become a peer specialist supervisor. So get certified yourself. But also, it's important to think about, is there a way, if I've only got one peer specialist at my organization and maybe a family partner, is there some way that I can bring together a consulting opportunity where other peer specialists can get together doing similar work and create a space where they provide consultation to each other? Especially if you do not come in with that expertise, right? It's important to have and create those opportunities for consultation and figure out all this stuff and then hire a peer specialist. I have done it wrong in the past because I didn't know what I was doing, just so you know. And once I figured out what I was doing, I never did it again. But having these foundational things in place first before you actually do the hiring will make things go so much easier, and that clarity of the role being front and center. The other thing is the importance of, as you're kind of doing this hiring and posting position, is making sure that others at your organization are educated on the role, right? So we think about peer workers, family partners. A worker is a worker, right? There's certain things that any worker who's hired at an organization has to do, has to meet, etc. Where things start looking different are going to be those roles and skills that a person may need for that role, as well as thinking about, there's that conversation around stigma, but making sure that as a supervisor or others don't step into that caretaking role, because it can be easy to do, right? And so you have to think about these things sometimes where you don't think about it as much in other roles. And then once again, we get back to the same. You're going to have objective evaluation. You're going to match to the needs of your organization or who that peer specialist or family partner is working with. As a supervisor, I'm always looking, when I'm hiring a team, I'm looking for variety. If I'm hiring for a specific program, I'm going to look and see, does that person who I'm hiring have similar experiences or have knowledge of that system? Because that's where that pureness comes. I'm not going to be looking at, do they have a college degree and they went to therapy and they sometimes have had some challenges with depression, not negating that. If I'm hiring for a role where a person's working on the ACT team, when I'm hiring for someone who may be working on the ACT team, and ACT team is for persons who really are navigating a lot of distinct challenges, have had multiple hospitalizations, or just it's a higher level of care, but also at times some of the challenges that persons experience, if you've not experienced some of those, it can be more difficult to find that place of pureness. Okay, so we want to find and match needs to the program. when I was hiring and looking at persons working with young people, even if a person was older, I was looking at, did they have experiences for themselves as a young person, right? Being able to connect from that age group. They may be 30, but their first age of challenges started happening in middle school. Place of connection. So things to think about. And so we asked some things, and these are just some things I'm gonna go through really fast. It's kind of an acronym I learned years ago, but it's like looking at the knowledge, and aptitude is that by definition is innate natural talent. You can't learn it in a book, right? And so we start thinking about some of these things, which are aptitudes, analytical reasoning, all these different types of things. You don't learn those in a book. But sometimes those are obviously things that you're looking for in a worker. Okay. I thought I took out all these little clicks, so I apologize. Here we go. When I'm looking at and hiring for a peer specialist or, in those roles, this is the knowledge that I'm looking for. Do they understand what the peer movement is? Do they know what the values of peer practice are? Can they demonstrate how to use a recovery story? Can they share and talk from their own lived experience of utilizing self-help tools and strategies? Have they had an experience running a group? If I'm asking a question, are they able to identify that conversation around learned helplessness versus self-determination? And so these are the knowledge that I'm looking for, but this knowledge isn't gained from a book, right? It's gained from their own lived experience and experiences in life. And so here's some of the things real quick. If you hear any of these things in your organization or in your hiring process, these are red flags, right? We're doing these people a favor by hiring them. These are all things I've heard, just letting you know. We're providing ongoing therapy by hiring peer workers. People with mental illness can't do stressful work, right? This is the one I love. And thankfully, we're getting a little bit further out from this, but basically we hire peer specialists. We've got to hire this peer worker, but they can file, they can run errands, they can do these other things because other duties as assigned, and then they won't upset anybody. And we can't give them too much responsibility because they might get sick, and we may be liable should they get sick or do something to themselves. I see your face, India, but but this is truth. These are all things I personally have heard, and have heard way worse versions of a lot of these things. Keep your ears open as you're implementing peer programs. It's not a right wrong. It's not about blaming or shaming, but if you're hearing these things, it tells you I need to do some education, right? It tells you there's a disconnect between what this role actually is and what it isn't. So, recruitment and reaching out. These are just basic things. There's some really specific language when you're recruiting and reaching out for the roles. Depending upon how you're looking at it or what you're looking specifically, past or present user, or past, I can't even believe I had user there, past or like my own language, past or present experience, has a personal experience of mental health services. There is some stuff in the TAC around for psychosocial rehab and skills training that states about having a year of experience. With family partners, it's obviously going to be is a family member and has experience in supporting their young person in navigating the system. A person's got to be able to self-identify as having lived experience, and these are just something extreme states, trauma, and or mental health condition, and you must have this whole conversation about personal experience. And when we think about recovery, mental health recovery, any kind of recovery, it's very subjective. It's not linear. Be careful about putting timelines on that, right? A lot of times when I have worked with organizations, they will put has to be in recovery for a year. Well, what does that actually mean? Does it mean that if I've had a dip in my own well-being, but I knew exactly what I needed to do, got the support that I needed, that I'm not in recovery during that time and I'm starting over again? No, it actually means that I'm actively involved in my own recovery journey, and sometimes things happen. But the moment it did, I knew what to take care of, right? Be aware of those things. Once again, these are just some other things to kind of keep mindful of. Some words, some language to think about. And a lot of people have questions around the ADA and hiring. And when we think about, you cannot ask if a person has a disability. Like Nydia could not ask me in a hiring process, and I'm using you as an example, Nydia, because I know you and you're right in my face. But she couldn't ask in that interview process, do you have a diagnosis of schizophrenia? Right? But she can ask things such as, can you share how your lived experience brought you here today? Right? Can you share a way in which you might see your personal recovery journey being a support to someone else? That's where you start finding out what a person's navigated. But you can't ask about a specific disability. And I do have a whole bunch of interview questions that I've asked over the years. If it's something that you're interested in, just let Nydia know, we can add that too. I'm just these are on here. We're not gonna go through them just kind of because of time, but these are just some example questions and some things to look out for, right? And then the red flag answers. And you'll have these. I just want to get to this last slide. I want to be mindful. I knew I put a whole bunch of stuff in here just because I wanted you to have it, but this is one question that I love. Tell me about your personal and professional background as it relates to this position. You should be hearing things. If you start hearing things about realistic recovery, if you start hearing things that are obstinate, you're looking for a journey, and it's not just like one specific pathway of recovery. If you're looking at like who's the best candidate and red flag answers, and like you've got staff, and I think it's important when we're interviewing persons for roles, especially peer professional roles, if we know that the culture that they're stepping into, that there still may be some challenges, and there may be some persons who they may be working alongside who may be apprehensive, that we ask, how would they navigate that in an interview? Because it actually says a lot about that person, right? I will tell you that these answers are actually answers I have gotten from interviews, just so you know. Everything I usually do is from something I've gotten. And B, right here is, I listen, affirm their experience, because we each come from different places and different worldviews. And it's about that co-educating and me learning as much about what their role and their concerns are as them learning as much about why my role is valuable, right? And we don't want to just be avoiding people. We don't want someone who's just going to avoid it, right? So things to think about, things to look at. But these are some highlights, and there's a lot more, but some of the ones as I was kind of thinking the last few days that I wanted to put here. As you're looking at your interview questions and the answers that people are giving, that you're going to start, that you want to see that persons are providing answers that talk about educating, about advocating, talking about that dignity of risk, supporting self-determination, and that it's okay to respectfully challenge practices that hinder recovery. that they're very clear that it's not a clinical role, that it's not a role where I'm coming in as a person of expertise. We say in peer work is that I'm an expert at not being an expert, and that takes a lot of expertise. It's really hard to do because I have all the answers, I can tell you, but that's not my role in a peer role. It's not my role to tell you what your path should be. And that place of mutual relationships. And, you know, when we talk about mutuality and peer roles, there would never be 100% mutuality, especially if someone's being paid, if they have the keys, if they have a badge. There's always power differentials. And we just want to acknowledge it and highlight it. And hopefully that also comes up in those interview questions. This is a document that I did not give to you, Alejandra, because I didn't get the link, that I will send. Hopefully, Nidhi, you don't mind sending some stuff out afterwards. I love this document. It's by Pat Deegan, and Sasha Altman DeBrule worked really hard on it. And we had a lot of conversations as they were creating it. And it kind of shows you like what a perspective from a peer's perspective would be, where that overlap might lie, and then what a clinical perspective may look like. Once again, it's another tool that you can use to check and see, you know, is the peer specialist or am I, or is the peer worker staying in their peer role? So we will send that out. These are just some broad functions as far as the roles. A peer specialist can really serve in so many different roles depending upon the organization. We're seeing peer specialists being implemented and integrated into libraries. Obviously, you're working within school districts. We're seeing peer specialists in working within emergency services, emergency rooms, working alongside first responders. We're seeing peer specialists being in roles that are on warm lines, which, you know, just anybody can come in, not like a crisis line. Peer specialists, there's also some foundationally these roles have been around for a long time, let me just say it. So these kind of are overarching roles that I always go back to when I'm talking about them really fast. But we think about these functions, and the first function is really of being that supporter, right? Using that lived experience to support another person as they explore who they are, as they explore what works for them, what doesn't work for them. And a lot of ways in which a peer supporter can do this, especially if you're looking at someone identifying things they want to achieve. Whole health action management, WHAM, or in Texas, you can get trained in whole health and resiliency, is a beautiful curriculum that keeps the peer specialist in the peer role and can support a peer supporter in really supporting an individual look at like different areas of their life that they want to work on and taking those actions in a way that is surrounded by natural supports. We talk a lot about individual advocate, and the key in individual advocate as a peer supporter, it's alongside the person. I should never be talking for a person, about a person, or putting my belief about what the person needs to someone else. I'm always going to come from the place that I believe that wellness is for anyone, and I believe in them, and that supporting them and finding different ways to find their voice. There's a role called a peer bridger. And when you think about peer bridger, it's really, there's this place between being a bridge in a couple ways, a bridge between staff, like staff, and the person in services. Sometimes you're negating different worldviews or different language, and sometimes it's just providing that place of connection, that place of understanding different perspectives. And there's a specific peer bridger model, which is around when persons maybe in the hospital and a person who works in the community meets them in the hospital and gets to know them before they come back out into the community. And that is also a model that is used when persons are getting ready to be released from jail and coming back into the community. And it's that peer bridger role. A navigator, this is the role where we really start seeing, and we're hearing a lot about it here and for the last 10 years maybe, but a peer support is supporting a person not just with their mental health challenges, but that link between primary health care, behavioral health care, that whole person, right? And really supporting the whole of wellness. So it may not just be focused on behavioral health, but also their physical wellness, and really looking at those dimensions of wellness that SAMHSA has put out. We're change agents. Those of you on this call are change agents just by you being involved in the conversation around peer workers. Peer workers, a function of their role is to create change within the agency or the system, is to challenge beliefs about what's possible. And, you know, this is the one workforce that it's only been developed since the recovery movement came into being. You know, family partners are right alongside saying, you know, advocating for different things, shifting what works and what doesn't, and supporting individuals and families to get their needs met. Just by being around, you are a change agent, because I guarantee you, if you're a peer specialist or a family partner and you walk into a room and someone would have been typically would use really derogatory language about a person with diagnosis, they either stop talking, right? Or they catch themselves. And then the most beautiful thing is when you walk into a room and you start hearing people using that human experience language. And all you did was be yourself, right? I feel like I'm running up a hill, and I knew I was, so we're almost there. Deal. I wanted to include this because as persons who are working alongside and implementing peer programs, it's important to think of it through the lens of this conversation around isolation, co-optation, and integration. And when I say that, when you start looking at like what the peer role looks like in an integrated space where they're actively able to stay in their role, right? And are a part of the organization, are a valued part of the teams, that's that place of integration. When you start seeing where others at the organization actually don't even know that peer workers are working at the agency, right? Or they don't even seek out any type of collaboration with the peer worker, that's when we start saying that peer workers are working in isolation. But this place of co-optation is the place for me as a supervisor that I am most aware of. You know, am I seeing places and spaces where peer workers, I don't know the difference between their role and another role, right? Am I seeing peer workers working in the same way as someone who may make clinical judgments, someone who may be in a counseling role, directive role? If that's what I'm seeing, you're in that place of co-optation. It's not a right, wrong. It easily happens, especially if you only have one or two or a few peer workers at your organization, right? But once we can see it, then we can do something about it, right? So I just wanted to provide this tool quickly. And we spent, well, it was a long night coming up with a whole bunch of scenarios. And we have a fun game we do in some of our trainings and about how different things look. But I just wanted to give you some different examples of what it would look like for integration, right? Because if I'm seeing this, we're doing good, right? Peer workers in their role, the organization's moving towards that place of recovery-based organization, and I can kind of hold on to this. I hope this is helpful, and I know it's just kind of a balance, but you also will see some slides that I've hidden that are not on here that you'll have when I send out the training that give a few more examples of that co-optation, integration, and isolation. And I've talked a lot about supervision already. I did want to add and include these last 3 slides, because when we think about supervision, which is our 5th pillar in implementation of peer services, and looking at professional development, is that you may have an administrative supervisor, right? But it's important that you also have someone who's going to provide that professional development supervision, And it may be someone who you contract with outside your organization, because you know that maybe you as a supervisor don't have that expertise or knowledge, and you want to make sure that they're working with someone who really has the knowledge of the role that they're in. You also then have making sure that team meetings, you're meeting with your team, you're meeting with the persons you're supervising, and you're making sure that there's space for the peer specialist, peer workers, family partners to receive education and training. Receiving education and training and staying up to date on this workforce and their role is one of the really highlights that a supervisor can do. And sometimes it's not always easy to, like, people are always taking off, they're doing this or that, but that's how they learn, and that's what they bring back to your organization. And it's actually in their code of ethics that they do it too, which I'm always grateful to be able to point back to that we provide space and that they receive this continuing education. Because making sure that the peer specialist who you are supervising is trained, gets to go through family partner training or through peer specialist training, receives those continuing education hours. Without that, it's difficult to have a really successful program. Because you want people to have that solid foundation, and they can't go to college to get that. Where they get that are from these certification trainings and CEU education. And I just want to include this too. This is just kind of a sample agenda for supervision. It's a really simple one. But I put this in here because I wanted to highlight a couple of things. One of the other things that I always do in supervision, or did in supervision with peer specialists, is I would have them bring in the code of ethics and identify one code of ethics that they thought they were really upholding well in an example. And then one of the code of ethics that they thought they were having some challenges with in an example. And what that did was it just made it a no thing for us to talk about what was working well and what wasn't. And so as a supervisor, I might catch things early on where I learned from past history that I would sometimes not catch things till it had all blown up because a person didn't bring it into supervision. And so that was one of my tricks to bring things in and get the information out. But the other thing is making this conversation about relationships with coworkers. These are things that anyone should be talking about in supervision, but also personal wellness. And that's not just related to peer specialists. I think, in the work that everyone does is talking about, like, how are they taking care of their well-being while at work is important. But it's related to work performance, right? Like, are there some strategies they're using when they've had a really difficult conversation with a person? Are they utilizing strategies to kind of like shift from that conversation to the next, right? Talking about that through the workday, not in relationship to, are they taking medications, all these other things that it easily can slide into, but it's about the work performance. Is that clear? I hope. Had to find a number of tricks to kind of come up with in relationship to this to help supervisors stay in the lane as a supervisor versus stepping into sometimes a counselor role, especially if those relationships were already there prior to hiring the peer specialist. Okay. That was my run uphill. How did you like that? We just did the 5 kind of pillars of peer services implementation in an hour. Obviously, it just kind of dipped our toe into all the different areas. And I hope you can see from that the importance of educating yourself, educating your organization, making sure that the person who's providing the services is educated in order for that role to be at its best. The importance of knowing and understanding those different funding mechanisms. And I love that Felicia's going to talk through some of the different ways for family partners to do some billable services, because that's always, in my understanding, has been a challenge in the past, right? That sustainability. organizations require it, but there's these billable services. Like, how do you make that happen? Being clear about who you're hiring, what you're hiring for, and the duties of the job. That clarity will save you a lot. And I saw your lovely face, Christina. Christina Carney jumped on, and she does work with us at Via Hope, and we're really lucky to have her. And she's over the training. She's the training manager. Your title changes too much for me, Christina. But she's one of the experts that we have at Via Hope who's really created some incredible CEU trainings that are offered, as well as holds the space for the certification trainings. And if you have any questions around trainings, what's offered, what's coming up, but also Christina do you want to say a little bit about HRSA? I don't know if that fits. It might fit in some of these circumstances. So just real quickly, I'll let you do that.
Sure. So, hello, everyone. So yes, I'm the training and curriculum design manager for Via Hope. I'm also the HRSA coordinator, and I'm a mental health peer specialist. So I bring that background as well to the role. Our HRSA program, so HRSA stands for Health Resources, Services, and Administration. And we have a BWET grant, which is the Behavioral Health Workforce Education Training. That's the grant that we got from HRSA. And so it's really all about getting peer specialists trained and certified, and for us into non-traditional spaces, for places where they maybe haven't had peer support in the past, but would really benefit from that. So we are in the process of onboarding our 4th cohort, which is just amazing to me. I think we are up to 14 or 15 placement sites at this time. So the application is closed, but in the future, if folks are interested in sending, getting someone the training, or if anyone's interested in being a placement site and wants to reach out, the next cohort won't happen until next year, but you'd be welcome to reach out to me over the summer if you were interested in being a placement site. And we provide everything for getting certified. So we provide the core training, a supplemental training for the reentry peer specialist, mental health peer specialist, or recovery support peer specialist. Those are specific to the grant. And then we get them that training, and then we pay for any costs related to getting the initial certification with Texas Certification Board if they need a background check. And then we provide the placement site for the 250 supervised field hours. We also provide a certified peer specialist supervisor for them to sign off on those hours, and there is a $5,000 stipend that goes with that as well. So it's a pretty great program. I like to tell folks, for someone who's wanting to get certified, it's a great option because it includes all the things. You don't have to worry about where you're getting your hours. You don't have to come up with the cost for the training. And for placement sites, I let them know it's a pretty low risk way of implementing, seeing, if you're interested in having a peer support program and wanting to see what that would look like, it's a low risk way to do that. Placement site obligations are pretty minimal. Providing some on-site supervision, some quarterly surveys and meetings. So it's I think it's a pretty great program. So if anybody has questions, I'll put my email in the chat box. And if anybody has questions about any of our trainings, please feel free to reach out to me. Thanks, Amy.
Thanks, Christina. I'm done, Nydia. Sorry. I'll turn it to you, Nydia.
Thank you so much, Amy, for all of that super valuable information. I just felt kind of the reaffirming of, peer roles and peer mutuality and all the peer stuff, but how it can get so complicated. Especially that penguin video. It's like, oh my gosh, I don't think I've ever seen that before. I was like,
oh, it's my favorite. It's
so right on point. I want to be like, I don't fit into the penguin costume. So thank you so much. I'm looking at the chat. I don't see any questions. I did kind of tell Amy, I was like, we're all kind of learning on this journey, so we may not know what we want to ask or what we should be asking. But, I'll go ahead and ask one more time. Are there, any thoughts, any questions when you saw the title of this community call? Maybe what did you think? What's maybe something that you can take back? I heard Amy say that we'll be sharing the slides as well. So Tammy, when I get those or however those come, we'll send those out as well. Is there any thoughts? And Amy's putting her email address in the chat as well. Thank you, Amy.
You're welcome.
I also just kind of wanted to mention, I know in Amy's presentation, she talked about peers. I think in her presentation, she was including family partners and peers. It can get confusing when we talk about peers or family partners, or if we're talking about everyone as a group. But all of this information I feel like was also could be applied to the family partner workforce.
Yeah, and that was my intention,
sure.
and that's why I tried to do the overarching, and it does. So I tried to say both, and then I forgot, so I apologize about that. I didn't want to negate that, but I think everything, when you look at the implementation pieces, that the aspects are very similar, right, in what you're looking at.
Right.
Roles are going to look a little different at times, but a lot of the aspects of implementation are similar.
For sure.
Well, it doesn't look like we have any questions in the chat box, and we have 2 more minutes before we're done. So can everybody join me in giving party hands to Amy and Christina and everyone else who helped with today's training, and Nydia as well. Thank you so much. There's a link in the chat box. Don't forget to click on the link, go and sign in for today's training session and evaluate it. But be sure at the bottom where it says optional, go ahead and put your name and contact information. That's the only way we'll know who attended today. And that's the only way we'll be able to send you your CEU certificates. So be sure to put your name and email address at the bottom of the sign-in survey. And that link is in your chat box. Are there any other final questions? If so, you have 10 seconds.
I wanted to make one final point. Amy put her email, and as you can see, Amy's very easy to talk to. Will answer your questions. I also wanted to point out Felicia Mason Edwards, who is the workforce manager for our peer unit at the state. She's also super easy to talk to. She's like, ask me the question. So please reach out to her. That's what she's here for. If you guys don't ask the questions, you don't have a job. We don't want Felicia to be out there without a job.
No, that was the wrong head move.
So please reach out to those 2 people if you have any questions, or to myself. Right, we're always here. Thank you all so much for your time.
Thanks again for having us, and thank y'all for the work that y'all are doing.
Thank you, everybody. Have a great day. Bye-bye.